Hello everyone and welcome back. It's Gina from orchidandopal.com, and today we are going to be making the Velvet Queen pendant, which is the second tutorial that I'm bringing you guys based on the contents of the Sunflower Bliss collection that I helped put together with Eureka Crystal Beads. If you haven't seen that collection unboxing, I will link that in the corner so you can check it out. And also, I have the link to the collection itself in Eureka's shop if you would like to pick one up, or if you'd like to pick up some of these items individually just to make this project. I'll be breaking this video up into two. In this first video, we're going to be making the actual main component itself. And in the second one, I will come back and show you how to make a triangular peyote stitch bail made with the Delicas. And that's just one way that you could finish this pendant, but feel free to get really creative, put your own spin on it, and simply have fun. Down below this video, I also have all the links for the products and the quantities of each of the materials needed to make the project. But to summarize, we're going to be bezeling an 18mm Lunasoft lucite cabochon in the round shape. And our bezel is going to include the 2-hole check glass triangle beads, 4mm round pearls, size 11 Delica beads in that really gorgeous mix, and some 15 round seed beads. Included in the collection is also a hand-dyed silk ribbon in this beautiful sienna sunset, rich red coral color gradient, and I think it just looks beautiful with this combination and picks up the brilliant shades of red that you can see in the pendant. For beading thread today, I'll be using my go-to 0.006 inch diameter Fireline, and you can use any comparable beading thread that you like. And I recommend a size 11 beading needle. And as usual, just get started by trimming off whatever you're comfortable with. I like to start with about a wingspan of beading thread. And once you have your materials ready to go and your needle threaded, we can begin making this pendant together. So let's jump into this tutorial. All right, guys, to begin, we're going to be using our 11 Delica mix. So you can sprinkle some of those out. And you can be totally random with it, picking up any colors you want in succession. That is totally up to you. But what we need to do is we need to string on 48 of our Delica beads in order to get this bezel started. And that's going to make the first row of peyote stitch in the round. I like to start to separate the groups of beads by tens. That way it helps me keep track of how many I have on the thread already. So we've got 10, 20, and need 28 more. While I'm picking up the rest of these, the name the Velvet Queen comes from one of the varieties of sunflowers that's out there. It's really gorgeous and it's got some beautiful burgundy and darker attributes about it. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about sunflowers is that they come in a range of colors, not just the most iconic gold and brown, but there's also some really dramatic reddish tones and various shades of orange that can show up in these flowers. So that really helped me to come up with the color palette for the Sunflower Bliss collection, being able to pull from some of these other gorgeous varieties. All right, so now let's just verify that we have all 48 of those delicas on our thread. And you can pull those down toward your tail, whether or not you're using a stop bead. I'm going to leave about 6 inches at the tail portion and weave that back in a little bit. But right now we can take our needle and just sew back through the first Delica bead, and it'll be loose until we make a little bit more progress around that first loop. And you can just hold that with your thumb and your forefinger. And this is where we're going to be stitching our peyote in the round, starting our second row by picking up another Delica bead, skip the next Delica bead, and then sew through the next one. And you'll repeat that all the way around the entire loop. So once again, pick up a Delica, skip the next bead, and sew through the next one, and then pull both sides of that thread tight. Still holding with your thumb and your forefinger, and you can see how it's creating the second layer of beads with one bead sticking up a little bit right over top of another in every other spot. So I've got this part started, just keep going in the same manner. And once you have the second row done, we'll meet back and continue on. All right, so here's the piece, and we are at the last bead for that row. So we can just go ahead and pick up that last delica and then skip that next one like we normally would. Sew through the next delica and also step up by sewing through the next one, which is sticking up from the very beginning of this step. Pull those threads tight to make sure that you bring those beads all together. And right now what I'm going to do is add a needle to my tail thread and weave that back in just to get it out of the way for the tutorial. So let me go ahead and do that and I'll meet you back. Okay, I'm pulling out my 15 O's, pouring out some of them on the bead mat, and we're gonna complete another round of peyote stitch, this time though using our 15 O's instead. And just like we did before, you'll pick one up, skip the next bead, and sew through the next. It'll just be a little bit easier this time because the ones you're gonna be sewing through are the ones that are sticking out a bit. So continue on adding one 15-0 in between each of those delicas. All right, so that brings us to our final one. We're going to put that in place and sew directly through our next delica and 15-0. So that serves as your step up for the next row, which is where you can pick up another 15-0 and sew directly through the next 15-0. You're going to do that again, but then on your third spot, you're going to just sew directly through the next 15-0, not adding a new bead. And you'll repeat that process all the way around, adding in two 15-0s and then skipping a spot and repeating all the way around. This part is going to form the front of our bezel and it'll have those decorative peaks that will surround the Lunasoft Cabochon. So complete that row in the exact same way all the way around the piece to start to set the foundation for all those peaks in place. And now we're on our last one, picking that up and going through the next 15-0. And I'm going to go through the next delica as well. And up through the next two 15-0s, which is starting one of those peak areas. At that point, we can pick up a 15-0 and then sew down through the next two 15-0s. Skip over the delica, sew through the next two 15-0s, pick up your new seed bead, and sew down through the next two 15-0s. And you can see that final seed bead finishes off the center of that peak in each section. So just keep sewing all around, adding in that final seed bead, and that's all we need to do to complete the front of this bezel. And at the last one now, you will pick up the 15-0 and then sew down through the next two 15-0s. I'm going to sew through the next Delica and 15-0. And then we're going to turn around by following our thread path, and I'm going to sew directly through that Delica that is next to the bead that we're coming out of, as well as the following Delica bead, going in the opposite direction because I want to head toward the back of the beadwork. Pulling out that cabochon, we're almost ready for it. We can start to shape our bezel around the top. Once we're at the back and coming out of one of those Delica beads that's sticking out, we're going to pretty much mirror what we did on the front. So we're going to pick up a 15-0, sew through the next Delica that's sticking out, and do that all the way around the piece, just like we did before with this row, not skipping any beads quite yet. So just keep going all around to finish up this row of peyote stitch. Now we can start to form the peaks on the opposite side, building on our foundation of 15-0s, picking up one to finish that row all together, sewing through the next bead and then up through the next 15-0. And with that round complete, we can continue by picking up another 15-0 and sewing through the next one that is sticking out. We'll do that again, 15-0, and sew through the next, but then skip the next space and instead sew directly through the next 15-0. Repeat that all around again, so two seed beads followed by a space. And it's also important to note that we're adding those peaks directly opposite of the ones on the front. So you want those to match up. And once you've made some progress with this row, you're welcome to grab your cabochon again and place that inside, holding it in place with your thumb and forefinger while you continue to bead this row. And you can gently start to tighten up the beadwork around the top of that cabochon. So I'm still going. I have my cabochon in place, and this row is just starting to be pulled gently around the back of it. So keep beading this row, and as you keep going, you'll see that this starts to come together without you having to hold it as securely. All right, now we have the beadwork loosely in place, ready to start that final row of peyote in the round to finish off the centers of each of those peaks, this time on the back, picking up a 15-0 and sewing down through the next two while skipping over that Delica space. Then sew through your next 15-0, pick up a new bead, then sew down through the next two seed beads that are sticking out. And if you go down through that next Delica bead, that's okay too, although you don't have to. My needle just happened to go right through that one. And keep sewing in the same manner, adding in those central seed beads to each peak around the back, making sure you pull the thread tight after each addition, and it really shaping that around the round shape of the cabochon. So keep sewing all the way around till you reach the beginning of that row again. And now you can see with this one being almost done and the thread pulled taut around the cabochon, the beadwork is shaping up nicely. You can just finish up that row by sewing through the next 3 seed beads, just like this, and pull everything nice and tight. All right, with that pulled tight around the cab and our thread coming out the top of a peak, we can then pull out our 4mm pearls. We're going to insert one in between each of those sections. So sew through the next 15-0 in the center of the next peak. Pick up a pearl and sew through the next 15-0 at the top. And repeat that all the way around. You're going to have a total of 8 pearls in place around the back. And as a reminder, keep pulling the piece tight as you add additional beads. We have one more to go. We can sew through that 15-0 like we normally would. Pull tight and then sew through the next 4mm where we started. Pulling tight again, of course. So that's a look at the base of our bezel. Everything's in place and wrapped around nice and tight. Coming out of our first pearl, we'll pick up a Delica and then sew directly through the next pearl. And repeat that 7 more times all the way around the piece. Still making sure you pull that kind of tight, bringing all of those pearls and beads together around the back of the bezel. Once you get back to the beginning, you can sew through the next Delica and the next pearl as well, and pull those beads tight into that ring. And then for good measure, sew around that entire ring of beads again on the back, the Delicas and the pearls, to reinforce that area. Just go one at a time if you need to. Make sure you don't miss any of those beads and continue to pull everything snug. There we go. So that cab is secure. We'll go through a few more beads. And I'm going to step down through the 15-0 that's right there after a pearl, as well as the next few beads. And we want to make our way following the thread path to the very central row of Delicas. It's all around the circumference of our cab. So we want to be coming out of one of those single seed beads right in the center. And I'm starting at the one that's coming out right at the beginning of a section with the peak. As you can see right there, And at this point, we can start to bead around the side of the piece a little bit. And that's where we're going to add some of our beads that will anchor in the remainder of our bezel. So coming out of that Delica, you can pick up a new Delica bead and then skip over that next row that's slightly off center and go straight through the single Delica bead in the next row. Repeat that again, pick up a new Delica, then sew through the next Delica that's in that exact same line, pull tight. This time follow up with a 15-0, and you're going to repeat that pattern all the way around your piece with 2 Delicas and a 15-0, repeating all around the center. So that's 2 more Delicas in, followed by that 15-0. And we'll just keep going. And just like we did with the other Delicas, you can pick those up completely at random, or you can be deliberate if you'd like about the colors that you pick up. So there's the side of the piece started. Just keep going and we'll meet back once you get to the beginning of this section again, which is where we'll start to add in some additional beads. All right, with our thread coming out of a Delica, we can then pick up a pearl, sew through the next Delica bead that's on the side. Make sure it's in place and the thread isn't twisted, but you don't have to pull it super tight. Just make sure it's snug in place. Then follow that up with a 15-0. Sew through the next 15-0. Pick up a new 15-0 and then sew through the Delica. And here you can pick up your next pearl and sew through the next Delica bead. And that's the pattern we're going to follow all the way around the side right now. So once again, a 15-0 through the next one, pick up a new 15-0 through the next Delica, and then pick up a pearl and sew through the next Delica bead. And pull that snug. So just keep doing that all the way around until you have a total of 8 pearls in place. All right, so I'm just finishing up that round with my last 2 15-0s, and then I'm going to go through a pearl, and then go through the next Delica and 15-0. Here's a look at the piece so far. You can see how it's coming together on all the sides at different angles. And this is where we're going to start to add some of our 2-hole triangle beads. We're going to sew down through the right-hand hole with that triangle pointed down in front of the beadwork. It's going to sit with the flat side against the cabochon. And if you have to try this a couple times to get these situated right, don't worry about it. You'll get the hang of it. We're going to be adding in now 3 15-0s. Then sew up through the open hole of the same triangle and pull these beads towards your beadwork. It can be a little loose at first till we get it in place. And then we'll sew through the next 15-0 and the next Delica that are sticking out and pull that snug towards your bezel. And your triangle should sit in place sort of like this. It'll still be loose for now. But then sew through your next pearl and the next Delica, as well as the next 15-0. And now you're in place to do that again with the 2-hole triangle. So grab one of those, and we're going to sew down through the right-hand side once again with the triangle pointed down. Pull that towards the beadwork. Now pick up 3 15-0s and sew up through the open hole of the triangle and slide those beads towards your bezel again. Now you're going to anchor that to your next 15-0 that's sticking up, as well as the next Delica. And like we did before, just get that triangle situated loosely in place. And you can sew through your next pearl, Delica, and 15-0. And you're just going to repeat this all the way around with our needle coming out and ready for another one of those triangle beads. So just keep sewing in the same manner until you have 8 triangles all the way around, one in each of the beaded sections in between the pearl beads. All right, now back to the beginning again. We'll sew through our next pearl and carefully sew through the next Delica and 15-0. Just be really gentle about this step, and if you would rather, you can switch to a size 12 beading needle. It's a little bit smaller, help you get through those tight spaces a little bit more easily, but you should be okay as long as you take your time. We're going to pick up a Delica bead and pop that into that open space above the next seed bead, and we're going to sew through the next 15-0 that's sticking up, as well as the next Delica, pearl, Delica, and 15-0. So just go through one bead at a time, even if you need to, if that helps you go through carefully. You just don't want to break any of those Delicas as you go around. That would not be fun. And then pull everything snug after each addition. We'll do this again, going through the pearl, through the Delica and the seed bead. And we can randomly pick up another Delica and sew through those next few beads. So just keep going exactly like that and insert that remaining Delica all the way around, forming a little peak at each of those seed bead sections. So here's our beautiful piece coming together. And once you finish that section, we're going to work our way toward the back of the piece. And eventually we want to go down through the triangle bead. I'm going to go down through that hole there so we can start to get to the back of the piece. Flipping that over. And then I'm going to sew through the next 2 seed beads so that I'm coming out of the one that's in the middle of those 3. And at this point, we can start to anchor these triangles to the bottom of the bezel so they stay in place nice and neat. And here you can pick up 3 seed beads, then sew through the delica in between the pearls at the very back that comes up next. Pick up 3 more seed beads, and then sew through the central seed bead on the back of the next triangle. Going to repeat that all the way around, just as shown. Pick up 3 more seed beads, sew through the next delica in between the pearls, doing that gently. Pick up 3 more seed beads, and sew through the central seed bead on the back of the next triangle. Creates this really cool zigzag pattern all around the back and finishes that area really nicely. As you keep going and carefully angle your needle a little bit if you need to get through those delica beads. And just keep beading in the same manner until you get back to the beginning where you started the step. And going through that last seed bead, that completes that section. Pull everything tight. And the beadwork for the pendant is actually done at this point. So right now, if you'd like to, you can go back through some of your beadwork to tighten any loose spots if you have any. Otherwise, you can sew through a few beads. Make a half hitch knot, and then sew through a few more. Repeat that a couple times, and then trim off your excess working thread. There's one of my half hitch knots just going under a thread bridge, which makes a loop, and then I sew through the loop. Go through a few more beads. Make sure you don't get your thread snagged on anything. That happens. And this is good timing because I'm starting to run out of thread at this point. So there's another knot, and I'll sew through a little bit more. And then I'll trim off my excess. All right, so here's a look at our pendant. Doesn't it look nice? And it feels substantial and secure. I really love this piece. I hope you do too. All we need to do at this point is add ourselves a bail, and then we can attach our beadwork to that lovely hand-dyed silk ribbon. But again, feel free to use this component in all sorts of different ways, and feel free to share with me how you do that. I love to hear about it, so feel free to leave a comment down below. Stay tuned for the second part of this tutorial where I will show you how to make that veil coming in just a few days. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, that way you'll be notified when that video is up. If you enjoyed this tutorial, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and share the video with your other beading friends. That's all for this time, and I hope to see you again real soon. Until then, I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and as always, happy beading.